Well, hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about layering sunscreen. I'm going to be answering some of the common questions I get about layering different sunscreens and layering products with sunscreen. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Andrea. I'm a board certified dermatologist. I would love it if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the thumbs up. It really helps my videos out a lot. All right, layering sunscreen. First question that I get, can we layer chemical and mineral sunscreens? Yes, you can. There is no reason to worry about chemical and mineral sunscreens, interacting or anything like that. A long time ago, there was some laboratory evidence that suggested that certain actives in mineral sunscreens might accelerate and compromise the stability of certain actives in chemical sunscreens. That was based on a lab test, but in real world situations, we know that's not the case. So it's fine to layer a chemical sunscreen and then apply a mineral sunscreen on over it, or vice versa, mineral sunscreen first, then a chemical sunscreen. And the advantage of doing this is that you're more likely to get the correct amount of sunscreen on your skin. We know that people under apply sunscreen. It's not because they're lazy or, goofy or whatever. It's just because it's very difficult to apply enough sunscreen initially to achieve the SPF stated on the bottle. So by applying multiple layers, you are more likely to, just by adding more quantity, you're more likely to achieve the amount of sunscreen on the skin that you need to achieve a good SPF. Now, I want to make it crystal clear that layering different SPF products is not additive in terms of the final SPF. So for example, if you apply an SPF 15 and an SPF 30 over it, that does not equal SPF 45. So don't think that, but the advantage it offers is that you're adding more sunscreen on to compensate for areas where you may have missed. Skip areas, or as I've said in other videos, the skin, it's not a flat sheet. It's textured, and one coat of sunscreen, not only can you have skip areas, but you can also have exposure of the epidermal markings that are not quite covered. So the more you put on in layer fashion, the more likely you are to get the correct amount on there. So how do you layer two different sunscreens? I suggest applying one sunscreen layer first and waiting 3 to 5 minutes to allow it to absorb and to dry before putting on another one. Why? Well, if you end up putting on another one on top of it, that can interfere with how each sunscreen sets up. So it's a better idea to allow one layer to absorb fully and dry and then apply another. How long do you need to wait? Approximately 3 to 5 minutes, but it will vary based on the vehicle of the sunscreen, meaning the kind of inactives, how the sunscreen is formulated overall. If it's a quick absorbing gel vehicle, it's gonna dry faster than a cream. So it's gonna vary, and it's also gonna vary dependent on the ambient humidity where you live. So 3 to 5 minutes is a rough estimate, but I haven't timed that myself. All right, and so after you apply, wait and then apply another layer. The reason to do that is also if you apply more sunscreen on top of kind of damp sunscreen, it can cause that pilling and balling. So there you go. All right, what about makeup? Can you apply makeup over sunscreen? Yes. Sunscreen should be the last step in your skincare routine, but it should come before makeup. Makeup goes on top of sunscreen. So the way to apply makeup over sunscreen is to make sure that the sunscreen has set up. Let it dry on the skin. You don't want to put makeup on top of wet or still damp sunscreen. Why? Again, you're going to run into that pilling and balling issue. It's a good idea actually to do your morning skincare routine, and then last step's going to be your sunscreen, and then maybe go have breakfast or something and then put your makeup on over it. That way it kind of reduces the likelihood of pilling, but that's just one additional thing you can do. I encourage you guys who do wear makeup over sunscreen to try and choose makeup that has SPF in it. Why? Because when you apply makeup on over sunscreen, there is always the risk that you are removing some of your sunscreen
just by the friction. So for example, if you're gonna powder, listen to me, I don't know much about applying makeup. Blending brushes and that kind of thing, you have to think about it. You're likely wicking away, flicking off some of that sunscreen layer. So I always encourage people to try and use sunscreen makeup that has some sunscreen in it. That way you're at least putting more back on. Again, it's that advantage of layering, that you are just putting more sunscreen on the skin and getting more coverage. You're not getting higher SPF, you're just getting more, you're ensuring that the skin is covered. But I want to make it crystal clear, you should never rely on on makeup with SPF as your only sunscreen. Why? Well, you're not going to wear makeup at a sufficient density to achieve the SPF stated. People are not going to be coating the neck, the face, the ears with multiple layers of foundation. It's just not going to happen. I mean, maybe. But the other reason is that a lot of makeup products that have some sunscreen in them, they're not broad spectrum, meaning they mostly just protect against those burning rays, UVB. They don't offer good UVA protection. But an advantage of using makeup over sunscreen also is that makeup has iron oxides in, it's part of how it appears brown and tinted. Makeup has iron oxides, which they won't protect you against UV, ultraviolet radiation, but they can protect against those pro-pigmenting wavelengths of visible light that also generate a lot of free radical damage in the skin. So that is an advantage of using makeup. In a perfect world, you'd be using makeup products that have SPF. Things like BB creams are a great option, in my opinion. As a side note, I do have a video on how to apply sunscreen over makeup, and I have a video on SPF containing products to use over makeup. So check those out. I'll link them down below in the description box. Probably one of the most common questions that I get is how to layer moisturizer and sunscreen. First question you need to ask yourself is, do I need to? Many cases, sunscreen alone is enough of a moisturizer. Sunscreens create a film on the skin that reduces water loss out of the skin. That can help with dryness quite a bit. They're often formulated with emollients to soften skin cell edges. And in some cases, they have humectants, which will impart hydration. For example, La Roche-Posay came out with a new sunscreen this year. It's SPF 30 that has hyaluronic acid in it. It's very moisturizing. However, in some situations, sunscreen can just kind of feel drying on the skin. Or some people have very dry skin. They don't find that sunscreen is adequately moisturizing. You certainly can apply moisturizer first, with a caveat that you allow it to absorb fully and dry before putting sunscreen on over. Why? Again, this comes back to that issue of pilling and balling up of the sunscreen on top of that layer of moisturizer. Some moisturizers, no matter how long, once they've dried, some moisturizers still are going to lend themselves to pilling and balling with sunscreen. For example, moisturizers that maybe are silicone heavy, sometimes they're not compatible with certain sunscreens, and that's why you get that pilling. Especially, I find the clash to really be if you have a silicone-based moisturizer and you put on a water-resistant mineral sunscreen on over it. I find that a lot of times those two butt heads and you get pilling. And once the sunscreen pills on the skin, it's not protecting you. I mean, it's not laying down and forming that protective layer that you need. Long story short, you can apply moisturizer underneath sunscreen, but you want to make sure that it dries fully and absorbs fully. When it comes to using your sunscreen as a moisturizer, I get this question a lot. Hey, I wash my face in the morning, and I've learned from your videos that it's a good idea to apply moisturizer to the skin after cleansing while it's still damp to really seal in hydration. How do I do that when I'm using my sunscreen as a moisturizer? Here is how I recommend doing it. Go ahead and try and apply the sunscreen to the skin while it's still damp. However, do be aware that some sunscreens, especially obviously those that are water resistant, are not going to go over damp skin particularly well.
So try it. However, realize that that first step of applying the sunscreen on to the skin while it's still damp, the product is acting as a moisturizer only at that point. Allow it to absorb fully and to dry, and then put on a proper layer of the product as a sunscreen. Why? Well, because the ingredients in the sunscreen, they may not set up properly on damp skin. But if you're using it to moisturize the skin first, then you can go ahead and try and apply it onto the skin while it's damp. And then you just absolutely want to make sure that you come on with another proper layer for the actual sunscreen. So this can be a very good approach. I find this works well with many chemical sunscreens that are not water resistant. I do find that certain zinc oxide sunscreens, if you try and apply them to damp skin, you're going to get clumping of the zinc, and it's very, it just doesn't work in your favor. So if you find that's happening, then just use a separate moisturizer. If you want to wash your face and apply a moisturizer in the morning, then that's fine to do. But overall, you certainly can try using the sunscreen. The advantage of using the sunscreen as your moisturizer too is that you're putting on a moisturizing layer, and then you're putting on a sunscreen layer. You're likely getting better coverage in that setting too. I also get questions. I apply one sunscreen in the morning. Can I apply a different sunscreen later on in the day for my reapplication? Absolutely. With a caveat that some sunscreens, for whatever reason, kind of butt heads, and you do end up getting that pilling situation, especially if the first sunscreen was very dimethicone heavy, and then the second sunscreen maybe is more of a gel vehicle, it's fast absorbing. You may find that you start to get that pilling, that rolling of the sunscreen up in sheets. So you kind of need to play around with it. I actually recommend, if you get a new sunscreen product, for example, and you want to know, can I layer this on over something? Do a test spot application like on your thigh the night before to figure that out before going all over your face and neck to know if it's going to happen, or, to give you some idea if it's going to happen. I also get questions about sunscreen sprays. Now, sunscreen sprays, they do not provide reliable coverage, meaning you're likely to get skip areas. If you use the sunscreen spray to the body, make sure that you use multiple passes and that you don't use the sunscreen spray while you're outdoors on a particularly windy day, because the majority of it is going to just, go out into the air and not on your skin. And for applying it to the face, you actually need to spray it into your hands first and pat it into the skin. It's not recommended that you spray sunscreen directly on the face. So for me, pointing that out to you guys, it's like, what is the advantage here of using a spray on your face? If you just like the formulation and you're okay with spraying it into your hands first and patting it on, by all means, then use that. But I think a lot of people want to use the spray because they don't want to actually touch and rub the skin. You need to rub it in, actually. So you don't, same thing with the body. I don't think I mentioned that. You do multiple passes and then you need to rub it in. So it's not, it's not the kind of thing that you can just mist on, unfortunately. Likewise, what about sunscreen powders? I love SPF powders for touching up. Again, just depositing more SPF on the skin, I think is beneficial, but do not rely exclusively on powder sunscreen. Why? You're gonna have to put a lot of powder on the skin to achieve the stated SPF. I mean, it's almost impossible. Powder is going to leave a ton of skip areas. I mean, it's not forming a film on the skin. And so I recommend going with a higher SPF powder if you are primarily relying on the powder for reapplication during the day. It's better to use one that's like SPF 50, I think is as high as they go. It's better to use that because you're more likely in that case to get a better final amount on the skin than if you use like 30 or 25 or something. So, you can use them, and I think they are a beneficial tool for reapplying on days when you're mostly indoors, you have a full face of makeup, but I do not recommend relying on powders or sprays if you are going to be outside, like at the beach,
I wouldn't rely exclusively on those. You need to actually reapply with your sunscreen. What about sticks? Sticks actually offer very good protection. Unfortunately, they're very susceptible to skip areas because you spread them on the skin and it's just very likely to have skip areas. But a lot of sticks are very thick in consistency and can actually offer pretty good protection, with the issue that they do result in skip areas, so they're less reliable in terms of the amount that you apply and the application quality. But the protection can actually be quite good. So sticks are another option I find that sticks are very helpful for reapplying around the eyes, especially if you're somebody who likes to wear a chemical sunscreen, but you find that it burns and stings around the eyes, then a mineral SPF stick is a great option. Neutrogena came out with one this year that's great, or last year. Cetaphil, I always want to call it Cetaphil, I don't know why. Cetaphil has one as well. That is another good option. A lot of the baby sunscreens make a stick form, great option for around the eyes. All right, the next question that I get is, when we reapply sunscreen, do we need to apply the same recommended amount? Ideally, yes. Ideally, you would. So it's recommended that you apply about 1/2 teaspoon to the face, the neck, and ideally you would reapply with another 1/2 teaspoon. But if you do the best you can. I recognize that people are not going to be applying that much all day. The more you can apply and the more you can reapply, the better. The more likely you are to get good coverage and get the proper amount on the skin. So the right answer is yes, that you do need to reapply the recommended amount. Now, if you are inside all day and you're not really outdoors, let's be realistic. No, you don't need to be reapplying the full 1/2 teaspoon. In those situations, maybe you are gravitating towards touching up with things like powders, as best you're able. But for days when you are outside, like if you are participating in outdoor activities, even if it's cloudy out, I do recommend reapplying the full amount. And reapplying early into sun exposure, again, the purpose of reapplying is not only to make up for sunscreen rubbing off, but it is to make up for the fact that you likely have areas that are not covered on the place where you put sunscreen because of the texture of skin and because of the difficulty of applying a good amount. So that is the main reason for reapplying. People will argue in the comments that that's overzealous, but it's not. If you go outdoors, if you're gonna be outside, and you don't reapply, you're very likely underprotected, and that can lead to sunburn and sun damage. Even if you don't have a sunburn, that leads to a lot of UV exposure. All right, guys, those are my tips for layering sunscreen and reapplying it. But remember, you never want to rely on sunscreen alone for your sun protection. You want to make sure that you use things like broad-brimmed hats, sun protective clothing. You want to be mindful of your sun exposure. You don't want to stay outside too long in midday sun exposure when sun intensity is at its highest. You want to seek shade using umbrellas and whatever shading devices there are. So that is really important. Sunscreen is not a shield of armor. It's just another thing that really can, when used daily and used consistently, can help not only in improving the signs of photoaging, objectively, reducing the burden of damage in the skin that leads to wrinkles and all that kind of stuff, but it can reduce the risk of skin cancer. So it's very important, but it's not enough. So you have to do it, but you have to do these other things that I mentioned, the sun protective clothing and the seeking of shade. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and as always, don't forget, sunscreen and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.